Caleb Hargrove pulled the frozen woman out of his fence post with his bare hands at dawn, and the first thing he noticed, before the blue lips, before the open eyes, before the wedding dress soaked stiff with ice, was the letter tucked inside her coat. His name was on it. His handwriting was not. She had traveled 1,000 miles through a January blizzard to marry a man who had never sent for her, and someone had made sure she would never make it to his door alive. Someone who knew exactly where she would fall. If this story already has you gripped, subscribe to our channel right now and follow every part until the very end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The body was at his fence line when Caleb found her. He had ridden out at first light to check on a section of fence that had been pulling loose all winter. And there she was, half buried in a drift, one arm stretched toward the post like she had been trying to grab hold of something solid before the cold took her. He dismounted, crouched, pressed 2 fingers to her neck out of habit, not hope. Nothing. She was young, blonde, wearing city boots that had never once touched unpaved road. The kind of boots that had no business being in Wyoming in January. Over her traveling dress, she had on a coat that was decent quality, but not nearly enough. Not for a night like last night had been. Not for temperature that had dropped to 20 below before midnight. He stood up slowly, looked at her for a long moment. Then he saw the letter, half visible at her coat's breast pocket, and pulled it out. His name was on the front. Mr. Caleb Hargrove, Sweetwater, Wyoming Territory. He opened it. 2 pages, clear handwriting. A man presenting himself as a widower with a good ranch and 2 daughters, and a need for a steady woman who wasn't afraid of hard work. Promises of a fair arrangement and an honest home. Signed at the bottom in script that had nothing in common with Caleb's own rough hand. Yours in faith and in earnest, Caleb Hargrove. He read it twice. Then he folded it along its creases, put it in his own coat, and rode hard for town. Deputy Henry Nash was at the sheriff's office, nursing his first coffee of the morning, when Caleb came through the door without knocking, which was how Nash knew immediately that something had gone badly wrong. Caleb Hargrove knocked. Always. "There's a dead woman at my fence line," Caleb said. "Young, blonde. Traveled in on yesterday's stage, I'd reckon. I need you to come." Nash set down his coffee. "Lord, how long's she been out there?" "All night from the look of her." Caleb put the letter on the desk. "And I need you to read that." Nash read it. His face changed. "You sent for a mail-order bride?" "I did not. This says, I know what it says, Henry. I didn't write it." Caleb's voice was flat and absolute. "Someone used my name to bring that woman here. Signed my name to a promise I never made. And she came. She walked from the stage depot to my property in the dead of January because she believed that letter." Nash looked at the signature again. "You're certain?" "I buried my wife 3 years ago." Caleb met the deputy's eyes and held them. "I have not once considered doing otherwise. Do not ask me again." Nash reached for his hat. They brought the body in, wrapped in horse blankets, and laid her in the back room of Ruth Whitfield's dress shop, because the church floor was too cold and Doc Briscoe's office was occupied. Ruth Whitfield was 50 years old and had lived on the frontier long enough that death did not make her flinch. She covered the woman's face with clean linen, straightened the sheet, and stood back. "She have a name?" Ruth asked. "Eliza Cord," Nash said. "That's what George Tully at the post office told me. She gave her name when she asked for directions." "She asked George for directions to Caleb's ranch?" "Yes, ma'am." "And he gave them to her? In January? At what hour?" Nash looked at the floor. Late afternoon. Ruth looked at Caleb. George Tully sent a young woman on foot to your ranch in late afternoon in January. Apparently. Ruth pressed her lips together in a thin, furious line. That girl walked 3 miles, in the dark, in boots like those. She nodded toward Eliza Cord's feet, still visible beneath the sheet. George Tully ought to be ashamed of himself. She looked back at Caleb. Who did this to her? Who sent that letter? That, Caleb said, is what I intend to find out. He was still standing in the doorway of Ruth's shop when Reverend Silas Decker appeared at the end of the street, walking at his customary unhurried pace, silver hair catching the thin winter light. The man had an instinct for trouble. Or rather, Caleb had always privately thought he had an instinct for being present when trouble surfaced. Always the first to arrive with condolences, always the first to know. Decker stopped in front of him. Terrible news, he said. His voice was warm as a lit stove. That poor young woman. I came as soon as I heard. He paused. You're sure you know nothing about this letter she was carrying, Caleb? I'm sure. People do desperate things when they're lonely. No one in this town would judge. Silas. Caleb's voice did not rise. It did something quieter and more effective. It stopped. Flat. Final. I didn't write it. I'm not in the habit of lying about what I do and don't do. Now, if you'll excuse me. He walked past the Reverend without another word. Decker stood in the cold and watched him go. The warmth in his expression did not disappear exactly. It simply paused, the way a candle flame pauses in a draft, bending, calculating, waiting for the air to settle before it straightened again. The second stage arrived at 11 in the morning. Caleb was at the post office reading through George Tully's stage records when he heard it come in. The groan of frozen axles, the stamp of exhausted horses. He stepped to the doorway. One passenger climbed down. She was tall. Dark auburn hair streaked lighter at the temples where the cold had touched it. She wore a coat built for use rather than fashion, and she moved the way certain people move through unfamiliar places, head up, reading every detail, committing the street to memory before she had fully stopped walking. She turned. She saw him. She came toward him without hesitation. You're Caleb Hargrove. Not a question. I am. Margaret Calloway. She stopped 3 feet from him, close enough to be heard over the wind, far enough to be cautious. She pulled an envelope from her inside pocket and held it out. I believe someone has been writing letters using your name. I'm guessing from the look on your face, you didn't write this one either. Caleb took it, opened it. Same phrasing as the first, same promises. Different handwriting, but the same signature. He looked up. No, I didn't. That's what I thought. She took it back. My name is Margaret Calloway. I'm a private investigator out of Denver. My husband was a detective. He was killed 2 years ago while investigating a man who signs his communications with a particular phrase. She tapped the letter. That phrase. Read the second paragraph. Caleb looked. The mountains here will hold your name. You will not be forgotten among them. My husband found that phrase in 6 separate documents tied to 6 separate crimes, Maggie said. Land fraud, witness disappearances. 2 deaths ruled accidental that weren't. She paused. I've been tracking this man for 2 years. The trail went cold in Cheyenne, and then this letter appeared in my post office box in Denver 3 weeks ago. Signed with your name. Sent to me specifically. She looked at him steadily. Whoever he is, he wanted me here. And he wanted to make certain I had a reason to come that wouldn't raise immediate alarm. A mail order arrangement. Yes. So he sent for you Caleb said slowly. And he sent for that girl. Eliza Cord. Maggie's voice was careful. I know. I asked at the stage depot before I came to find you. She arrived yesterday. I arrived today. A beat. I am not here by coincidence, Mr. Hargrove. And that girl was not killed by coincidence. We were both brought here deliberately. The difference is that I arrived one day later than she did. The cold pressed between them. Caleb heard what she wasn't saying, that she had come within 24 hours of the same fate. He looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them looked away. You'd better come inside, he said. George Tully made himself scarce inside of 90 seconds, which was either very good social instincts or the habit of a man who preferred not to be present when important conversations were happening. Caleb put both letters on the counter side by side. Maggie studied them. Her eyes moved precisely, the way eyes move when they've been trained to look rather than just see. Same person, she said. Look at the capital H. Same hand despite the different pen pressure. These were written weeks apart, but by the same writer. She pointed. And here, mountains will hold your name, mountains will remember. He varies the phrasing slightly each time, just enough to seem coincidental. But the meaning is identical. This is a signature, a deliberate one. She straightened. He marks his work. He wants someone to eventually connect the pieces. Why? Because he's proud of it. Her voice was flat. Men like this always are. Men like what? She was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, choosing. Men who have been committing crimes for long enough that they believe they're untouchable. Men who've had enough practice hiding in plain sight that they've stopped being afraid of being found. She looked up. They start leaving trails on purpose, because the hunt becomes part of the pleasure. The door banged open, and Clara came in trailing snow and noise and absolute 7-year-old disregard for atmosphere. Papa, Josie and I waited at the ranch for an hour. Mrs. Whitfield said you were here and supper won't... She stopped, looked at Maggie, tilted her head. Who are you? Clara. Caleb's voice carried the worn patience of a man who had been having this exact conversation with this exact child for 7 years. I'm Margaret Calloway, Maggie said, looking at Clara directly, the way adults often failed to. I came in on the morning stage. Are you the new mail-order bride? Clara asked. Because Dot Reeves said Papa had one of those come, and she died in the snow, and it was very sad, and... I'm not. Maggie kept her face level. I'm here about something else. Clara studied her with the frank assessment of a child deciding what category to file a person in. You don't look like a mail-order bride anyway, she concluded. You look like someone who knows how to do things. Clara. Caleb said it the way fathers say a name when they need a child to stop producing words. Josie stepped in behind her sister, quieter, slower, reading the room the way she always did before she committed to entering it. A habit so much like her father's that it was almost painful to see. She was 12, and she had her mother's cheekbones and her father's dark, watchful eyes, and she used both of them now on Maggie Calloway with undisguised assessment. Miss Calloway, Josie said after a moment, I saw the woman who died, Eliza Cord. I rode through town yesterday afternoon, and she was standing outside Mrs. Whitfield's shop, looking in the window. Caleb went still. You saw her? Yes, Papa. Josie's voice was steady. She wasn't alone. There was a man standing nearby. Not beside her, nearby. The way someone stands when they're listening without appearing to listen. She paused. He walked away when he noticed me looking. But I saw the way he moved. What do you mean, the way he moved? Maggie asked. Josie considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Slow. Very deliberate. like a man who has decided that hurrying is beneath him. Another pause. He walks like Reverend Decker, that particular walk, like every step is chosen. The post office was very quiet. Caleb and Maggie looked at each other across the counter. The two letters lay between them. Josie. Caleb's voice was gentle and left no room for argument. Take your sister to Dot's house. Stay inside. Don't go anywhere without telling Dot first, either of you. Josie looked at him for a moment. She was 12 years old, and she understood from his face that this was not ordinary caution. Yes, Papa. And Josie, she stopped. You did right, telling me that. You did exactly right. Something moved briefly across her face. Not quite a smile, not quite relief. Then she took Clara's hand and walked out. Clara twisted back at the last second. It was nice to meet you, Miss Calloway, she announced to the whole street, and then the door swung shut behind them. Maggie was quiet for a moment. Your daughter just placed Reverend Decker at the scene within hours of Eliza Cord's death. She placed someone who walks like him. Caleb was careful. A 12-year-old's impression of a walk isn't evidence. No, but it's the right direction. Maggie picked up her carpet bag. How long has Decker been in Sweetwater? 7 years. Came from back east, he said. Never was specific about where. Does he have medical knowledge? Anything in his background that would suggest training beyond seminary? Caleb frowned. He set Bobby Marsh's broken arm last spring when Doc Briscoe was in Casper. Said he'd picked up some field medicine during the war. He paused. He never said which side. Maggie looked at him steadily. I need to talk to Dorothy Reeves. You said she knows everyone. She knows everything about everyone, which is a different thing and more useful. He put on his hat. I'll take you. I can find 2 doors down on my own. She pulled her coat tight. Caleb. He looked at her. It was the first time she'd used his name. Someone brought that girl here and let her walk 3 miles to her death in January. They brought me here because they wanted me close enough to control. She held his eyes. Whatever this is, it started before we arrived. It's been building for a long time in this town. And the man building it? She stopped. One controlled breath. He killed my husband. And I have been cold and tired and 2 steps behind him for 2 years. And I am done with that. She walked out. Caleb stood in the post office for a moment after she left. Then he took both letters out of his pocket, folded them together, and put them in his breast pocket next to nothing. There was nothing in that pocket. He had not carried anything in that pocket since Eleanor died, because Eleanor used to tuck notes there when he rode out for the day. Little folded squares of paper with 1 sentence on them. Come home safe. The girls need their father. He had kept the last one until it fell apart from handling. He put the letters in a different pocket. Then he followed Maggie Calloway out into the January cold. Across town, Ruth Whitfield sat beside the sheet-covered body of Eliza Cord and did not move. She had been sitting there for 20 minutes. In the drawer of her sewing table, under a bolt of blue calico, was a letter she had received 6 weeks ago. It had asked her to say nothing when certain people arrived, asking certain questions. It had said this with the pleasantness of a Sunday invitation and the unmistakability of a blade held flat against a palm. She had said nothing to no one for 6 weeks. Eliza Cord was 24 years old, and she had died in the snow 3 miles from a house she had never reached. And Ruth Whitfield had said nothing. Her hands, folded in her lap, had not stopped shaking since morning. The snow was coming down in earnest now. The road out of Sweetwater had been drifting closed since midday, and by nightfall it would be sealed completely. No stage in, no stage out, no way in or out of this town until the storm broke, and a Wyoming blizzard in January did not break for 2 weeks sometimes. 52 people would be locked inside these borders together, with each other, with their secrets, with the body of a young woman and the man who had arranged her death, and whatever it was he had planned for the 2 people who had just started to put his pieces together. In the back office of his church, Reverend Silas Decker wrote 2 lines in a small leather journal, blotted them, locked it away. He was 58 years old, and he had been in Sweetwater for 7 years, and he had killed 11 people in his lifetime, with the same calm practicality that other men applied to carpentry or farming. He did not enjoy it. He did not regret it. He simply did what was necessary when the situation required it. He folded his hands, bowed his head. His lips moved in prayer, sincere and practiced, genuine in the way that a man is genuine when he has told a lie so many times it has become his truth. 2 doors away, Maggie Calloway knocked on Dorothy Reeves's front door with her left hand. Her right hand rested near the pistol in her coat pocket. Thomas had taught her that. Keep one hand free at every door. Thomas had forgotten his own lesson on a Wednesday afternoon in a Denver alley, and she had buried him in the rain on a Friday, and she had kept that lesson every single day since, for both of them. The door opened. Dorothy Reeves was 60 years old, with gray hair and a face that had earned every line on it. She looked at Maggie for a long moment. Then she looked past her at the snow and the closing sky, and the town going quiet around them. Then she looked back. "Took longer than I expected," Dot said, "for someone like you to show up." She stepped back from the door. "Come in before the cold kills you too. I've been sitting on something for 6 weeks, and it is eating me alive, and I believe you might be the only person in this town I can trust with it." Maggie walked in. Dot closed the door behind her. Outside, the snow fell harder, faster, erasing the street, erasing tracks, burying everything that had happened and everything that was coming under a clean and indifferent white. The storm was here, and it was not going to stop for a very long time. Dorothy Reeves did not offer tea. She did not ask Maggie to sit down or take her coat, or make any of the small social gestures that women of her generation performed automatically in their own homes. She walked straight to the fireplace, stood with her back to it, and looked at Maggie the way a person looks at someone they have been rehearsing a conversation with for a long time. "6 weeks ago," Dot said, "I received a letter. No return address. Posted from Cheyenne." She folded her arms across her chest. "It told me that a woman would be coming to Sweetwater, asking questions about certain men in this town. It told me to say nothing to anyone about what I knew. It told me—" She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "It told me that my daughter in Laramie was a lovely woman with a lovely family, and that it would be a shame if something were to happen to disrupt that." Maggie did not move. "Someone threatened your daughter." "Someone threatened my daughter." Dot said it back, flat and furious. The way you repeat a thing when saying it out loud still doesn't make it feel real. "My daughter has 3 children. The youngest is 4 years old." She looked at Maggie. "So I said nothing. For 6 weeks I said nothing, and I watched, and I told myself I was protecting my family. And then this morning they brought that girl in from Caleb Hargrove's fence line, and later in Ruth's back room, and I—" Her voice broke, just slightly, just for a second. Then she pulled it back together with visible effort. "I cannot say nothing anymore. I cannot sit here and say nothing while young women die in the snow." "Tell me what you know," Maggie said. Dot crossed to the small writing desk in the corner, opened the top drawer, and pulled out an envelope. She held it out. "The letter first, then I'll tell you the rest." Maggie read it. Same deliberate phrasing, same careful, pleasant language wrapped around something that was neither pleasant nor careful. Your family in Laramie is much on my mind. I pray they remain safe and undisturbed. I trust you will ensure they do. She folded it. How long has Reverend Decker been coming to you for private counsel? Dot went very still. I never mentioned Decker. No. Maggie held the letter up slightly. But whoever wrote this knows your daughter's situation in enough detail that they've been watching your family for some time. That takes resources and patience, and the only man in this town who has made it his business to know the private circumstances of every household. She let it rest there. Dot sat down on the edge of her chair like someone whose legs have been holding out on them. He came to me 3 years ago, she said quietly, after my husband died. He was very kind. The way he listened, the way he seemed to understand. She looked at her hands. I told him things I had not told anyone. About the debts Harold left. About the money I'd borrowed from a man in Casper to keep this boarding house running. About certain arrangements that weren't entirely above board. She looked up. He never used any of it. He was just present, concerned. And I was grateful, and I trusted him. And I am a fool. You are not a fool, Maggie said. You are a woman who is grieving, and he was a man who knew exactly how to use that. There is a difference. She leaned forward slightly. Dorothy, what do you know about who he was before Sweetwater? Dot was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind picked up and drove snow against the window glass like thrown gravel. He told me once, only once, and I don't think he meant to, that he'd spent time in Virginia during the war. He said it the way men say things they wish they hadn't. And then he talked about something else very quickly and never mentioned it again. She met Maggie's eyes. I looked at his hands after that. I'd never looked at his hands before. He has scars across both palms, old ones, healed, white, the kind that come from rope. Restraint cord, Maggie said, almost to herself. Or reins. Heavy cavalry reins, handled over years. She stood up. I need to see the original letter he sent you, and anything else you've kept. Any note, any correspondence, anything in his handwriting. I kept everything. Dot said it with a kind of exhausted defiance. Because I knew, some part of me always knew that one day I would need to give it to someone. I didn't know who, or when. She stood. Your husband, the detective, was he the one tracking him before you? Maggie's answer was a beat too slow, which was answer enough. Yes. Dot looked at her with the clear-eyed sympathy of a woman who had buried her own husband and knew what that weight felt like. I'm sorry for it. So am I. Maggie said it without softening it. Every single day. The door opened without a knock, and Caleb came in, bringing cold air and urgency with him in equal measure. He read the room in one sweep. Dot's face, Maggie's posture, the letter on the table, and closed the door behind him. Ruth Whitfield wants to talk, he said. She sent her neighbor's boy to find me. Said she's been sitting on something and she can't sit on it anymore. Same thing Dot just told me. Maggie picked up her coat. He's been maintaining silence through intimidation. Multiple people in this town are carrying things they haven't said. She looked at Caleb. How many people here would you say genuinely trust Decker? Caleb thought about it honestly, the way he thought about most things. Half the town goes to his services regular. Maybe a third of those would call him a friend. He paused. He's done genuine good here, set bones, sat with the dying, married couples and buried their children. Whatever else he is, he's been useful, and people remember useful. That's how they survive, Maggie said. They become indispensable. They make themselves so woven into a place that pulling them out feels like it would unravel everything. She buttoned her coat. Let's go hear what Ruth has to say. Ruth Whitfield was still in the back room of her dress shop, still in the chair she'd been sitting in all morning when they arrived. She stood when she heard the door, and something shifted in her face. Relief, mostly. The relief of someone who has been waiting too long to lay down a thing that is too heavy. She did not wait for them to ask. "He came to me in November," she said. "6 weeks before you arrived." She looked at Maggie. "He knew you were coming. He knew your name. He said that a woman named Margaret Calloway might come to Sweetwater asking questions, and that if she did, I was to tell her I knew nothing." She paused. "He showed me a photograph of my brother's family in Missouri. He said it very gently. He said families were fragile things, and how grateful we must be when they were safe." Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "My brother has 4 sons. Caleb made a sound, low in his chest. "He threatened every woman in this town who might talk. Only the ones who knew something," Maggie said. "He's specific. He doesn't waste effort." He identified exactly who had information he needed controlled, and he controlled them. She looked at Ruth. "What do you know about him? What did you see that made him choose you?" Ruth looked at the sheet covering Eliza Cord for a moment. Then she crossed to her sewing table and opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a small bundle of papers tied with ribbon. 2 years ago, a man passed through Sweetwater. Traveling through, just one night. He had dinner here at the boarding house, and he asked about the Reverend. Specifically asked if there was a Silas Decker in this town. He didn't look like a man making friendly conversation. He looked like a man who had been looking for something for a long time and was close to finding it. She held out the bundle. "He left these behind when he rode out the next morning. I don't know if he left them on purpose or forgot them, but I kept them." Maggie took the bundle, untied the ribbon. The first paper made her hands stop moving. It was a copy of a military record. Confederate Army, a Colonel Arthur Vane, 3rd Virginia Cavalry. The photograph attached was 30 years old, but the face in it, the long jaw, the light eyes, the particular set of the shoulders. She had seen that face every Sunday from a church pew for the past 3 years of this investigation. She had seen it last 2 hours ago in the cold street outside this shop. "The man who left these," Maggie said, and her voice came out more carefully than she intended. "Was his name Thomas Calloway?" Ruth looked at her. "Yes, how did you—" "He was my husband." Maggie set the papers on Ruth's cutting table and pressed both hands flat on the surface for a moment. Just a moment. Then she straightened. "He was here. He found it." She looked at Caleb. "He was 2 hours from having everything he needed, and Decker knew it, and—" She stopped, controlled it, put it back in the place she kept it. "He was killed 6 weeks after he left here. The death was staged as a robbery." She picked up the papers. "These are why." The room was very quiet, except for the wind working at the eaves. Caleb moved to stand beside her, not touching, just beside, the way a man stands when he wants someone to know they are not alone, without making a production of it. "What do we do with this?" "We can't go to Nash," Maggie said. "Not yet. He's young and he's honest, but he's also loyal to Decker. And if Decker gets one breath of warning—" She shook her head. "We need more. We need something that can't be argued away. Military records and a 12-year-old girl's impression of a walk won't hold in any court." "What will?" "His journal." Maggie had been certain of this since Dot described the letters. "Men like him keep records. They can't help it. They believe their own history is worth preserving." She looked at the papers in her hand. "The question is where?" "The church," Ruth said. Both Maggie and Caleb looked at her. "He has a locked room in the back of the church. He calls it his study. No one goes in without his invitation. I've been in there once, when my husband was dying, and he brought me there to pray." She paused. There was a cabinet against the far wall. Military issue, old, padlocked. He saw me looking at it, and he moved to block it, and he talked about something else. I never forgot it. Caleb put his hat on. "I know that church better than he thinks. I helped build the addition 7 years ago." He met Maggie's eyes. "There's a side door off the alley that the lock has never worked properly on. Never bothered fixing it because Decker said he preferred the congregation to use the front." "Tonight," Maggie said. "Tonight." He looked at Ruth. "Say nothing to anyone, not a word." Then he looked at Maggie. "I need to check on my girls first." She nodded once. "Go." He went. And Maggie stood in Ruth Whitfield's back room with the papers that Thomas had left behind, the papers that had cost him his life. And she let herself feel it for exactly the length of time it took to draw one full breath. The cold of the room, the weight of 2 years, the fact that he had stood in this town, had been this close, had touched these papers with his own hands. Then she folded the breath back out and put the papers in her coat and became a detective again, which was the only thing she had let herself be since the Friday she buried him in the rain. Caleb found his daughters at Dot's kitchen table, eating cornbread that Dot's neighbor, Mrs. Ames, had brought over. Clara had cornbread crumbs on her chin and was deep in a conversation with Mrs. Ames about whether horses or dogs were smarter. Josie was sitting with her hands around a mug of something hot, watching the window and the snow coming down. She looked at her father when he came in, and she knew immediately, because she always knew, that something had changed. "Papa," her voice was low. "Is it bad?" "Not yet." He crouched to her level, the way he always did when he needed to speak to her as herself, rather than as the older sister, the responsible one, the one who held things together. "It might get harder before it gets easier. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "Yes." "I need you to stay inside. I need you to keep Clara inside. I need you to not ask Mrs. Ames or anyone else any questions about what's happening. And I need you to trust me." Josie looked at him for a long moment. 12 years old, with Eleanor's cheekbones and his own eyes, and more good sense than half the adults in Sweetwater. "Is Miss Calloway helping you?" "Yes." "Good." She said it simply, like something settled. "She looks like someone who doesn't give up." Caleb stood. He touched the top of her head once, brief and firm, the way he touched her head when words didn't cover it. Then he looked at Clara, who had stopped her conversation with Mrs. Ames and was watching him with cornbread still in her hand. "You mind Josie," he said. "I always mind Josie," Clara said, which was a statement so far from true that he almost smiled despite everything. He kissed her forehead and walked back out into the cold. The snow was falling hard now, thick and relentless, the kind that didn't so much fall as accumulate, building walls of white against every vertical surface. Caleb stood in the street for a moment and looked at the church at the far end of town. Lamplight in the front windows, smoke from the chimney. The picture of warmth and welcome. He had helped build that addition with his own hands 7 years ago, hauling timber and driving nails alongside 3 other men, while Silas Decker brought them coffee and called them the backbone of the community, and meant every word of it, or seemed to. He wondered if anything about the man was real. He wondered if there was a version of Silas Decker that existed somewhere underneath Arthur Vane, some remnant of an actual person. Then he decided it didn't matter. Real or not, the man had killed Thomas Calloway and walked away from it, had threatened women and their children to buy their silence, had lured a young woman across 1,000 miles of winter and left her at his fence line to die. It mattered not at all what lived underneath that. What mattered was what happened next. Maggie was waiting at the corner when he came back, her collar up against the wind, her eyes moving the street with the automatic vigilance of someone who had stopped assuming they were safe a long time ago. She looked at him when he reached her. "Your daughter's all right?" "Yes." "Good." She pulled her coat tighter. "We have until tonight. We need to use the daylight." She turned and began walking. "Tell me everything you know about who came to this town in the last 10 years and didn't come from where they said they came from." Caleb fell in beside her. "That's about half the population." "Narrow it down." A pause. "Who came with money they didn't earn here? Who settled in faster than a newcomer ought to? Who knew things about the region that a stranger shouldn't have known?" Caleb thought about it as they walked, the snow coming down around them, the town quiet and shuttered and locked inside its own fear. He thought about 7 years ago, and a silver-haired man who had arrived in Sweetwater on a spring afternoon with a small trunk of books and a letter of recommendation from a church in Roanoke, Virginia, and had delivered a sermon the following Sunday that made 3 grown men weep, and had never once, in 7 years, let anyone inside that locked room at the back of his church. "There's one name," Caleb said. Maggie looked at him. "I know," she said, "but I need you to say it anyway. I need to hear someone else say it out loud in this town." He said it. Silas Decker. The wind took the name and carried it down the empty street, and the snow covered the tracks they left behind them as they walked, erasing every sign that they had been there, erasing everything. The way a Wyoming blizzard always did. The way this particular storm had been doing since it started, covering what needed to be hidden, preserving what could not afford to be found, keeping every secret this small town was carrying locked under clean and merciless white. But snow melted. It always did, eventually, and everything it had been hiding came up with it in the spring. They spent the afternoon doing the only thing they could do while daylight lasted and the storm kept everyone indoors. They talked to people, carefully, one at a time. Maggie asked the questions, and Caleb stood nearby because his presence told people that this was serious, and his face told them that lying would be a poor decision. George Tully at the post office remembered 3 letters posted to out-of-state addresses in the past 2 months, all left in the outgoing box overnight, all in the same envelope style. He had not looked at the addresses because that was not his business, and he was a man who respected boundaries, which Maggie translated privately as a man who was afraid of Silas Decker and had found a principle to dress that fear in. Old Pete Garrison, who ran the livery stable and had been in Sweetwater longer than anyone except Dot Reeves, told them that Decker kept a horse at the far end of the stable, a good horse, fast, not a preacher's horse at all, saddled twice a month for rides that Decker called prayer walks in the hills. Pete said this with the studied casualness of a man mentioning something he had been meaning to mention for a long time and hadn't found the right occasion for until now. "Those rides," Maggie said. "Where does he go?" Pete rubbed the back of his neck. "I followed him once, about a year ago. Curious, I suppose." He paused. "He rides north, up toward the old Reardon claim. There's nothing up there anymore. Reardon pulled out 4 years back, but the mine shaft is still open. I watched him tie his horse and go inside." He looked at Caleb. "He was in there near an hour. I didn't wait to see him come out." Caleb and Maggie looked at each other. Neither of them said anything until they were back in the cold street. "He's keeping something in that shaft," Maggie said. "Or someone," Caleb said. She stopped walking. "You think there's someone alive up there?" "I think a man who has been operating in this territory for 7 years without a single loose end Has to be keeping his most important evidence somewhere other than a locked cabinet in a building that 40 people have keys to. He looked at her steadily. The cabinet in the church is a decoy, or at best, a secondary location. Whatever he truly cannot afford to lose is somewhere no one would think to look. Maggie turned this over. He was right. She had been so fixed on the cabinet, on getting into the church tonight, that she hadn't followed the logic past the obvious step. Decker was not obvious. Nothing about him was obvious. That was the point. "The mine shaft is 2 hours north in this weather," she said. "In good weather, it's 40 minutes on a fast horse." "Then the church first," she said. "Whatever's in that cabinet, we need it. Even if it's a decoy, it tells us something. And if he has a journal, any record of what he's done and who he is, it might be the only evidence that survives what happens next." She started walking again. "Tonight, the side door. After midnight," Caleb said. "He'll be in his rooms by 10. He keeps regular hours." "You've watched him." "I watch everyone." He said it without apology. "It's a small town. You learn people's rhythms whether you intend to or not." They were passing the church when the door opened, and Decker stepped out. He was pulling on his gloves with the unhurried precision that characterized everything he did. He looked up, saw them, and his face arranged itself into the warm concern of a man who cared deeply about his community and everyone in it. "Caleb, Miss Calloway." He came down the 2 front steps. "I've been hoping to find you both. Terrible day. I wanted to offer the church as a gathering place this evening. People are frightened, and frightened people do better with community around them." He looked at Maggie. "Have you had any progress in understanding what happened to that poor girl?" "Some," Maggie said. She kept her voice pleasant and her face neutral, and her eyes on his face with the focused attention of someone reading a document for inconsistencies. "I imagine it's difficult, coming into a community you don't know, trying to understand its dynamics." He said it gently, almost sympathetically. "If there's anything I can tell you about our town, about our people, I hope you'll feel free to ask. I've been here 7 years. There's very little I don't know about Sweetwater." "I appreciate that," Maggie said. "Actually, I did have one question. Do you happen to know if anyone in town has business connections in Cheyenne? Specifically, anyone who posts correspondence there regularly?" Something moved in Decker's eyes, so small and so brief that anyone not specifically watching for it would have missed it entirely. Then the warmth closed back over it, like water over a stone. "Several people, I'd imagine. It's the nearest city of any size." He smiled. "I couldn't say specifically. George at the post office would know better than I would." "Of course," Maggie smiled back. "Thank you, Reverend." He nodded to them both and walked away through the snow with his particular deliberate stride. Maggie kept her eyes forward until she heard the crunch of his footsteps fade. "He knows we're asking questions," she said. "He knew before we started," Caleb said. "That's not what concerns me." He glanced sideways at her. "The way he looked at you just then, when you asked about Cheyenne." "I saw it." "What did it mean?" "It meant he's deciding something." She kept walking. "He's been in control of this situation since before we arrived. He brought us here, he managed what we knew, he maintained the variables. But variables have a way of multiplying." She paused. "Eliza Cord was a variable he eliminated quickly because she'd served her purpose and become a liability. I am a different kind of variable." "Because you know who he is." "Because I'm the only person alive who knows enough to put it together. Thomas got close. Thomas died." She said it straight, without inflection, because that was the only way she could say it without it stopping her. Decker is deciding right now whether I'm more useful alive or dead. The calculation that kept me breathing up until today was that he wanted to know how much I knew and who I'd told. Once he decides he has that answer, she left it there. Caleb stopped walking. He turned to face her fully in the falling snow, and his expression was the one she was coming to recognize. The one that meant he had something to say and was going to say it plainly, regardless of how she received it. Then we don't give him time to finish deciding. That's what tonight is for. Tonight isn't enough. He held her eyes. We need Nash. I told you, Nash is 28 years old, and he has never once in his career looked the other way when something was wrong, Caleb said. I've known him for 3 years. He admires Decker the way a young man admires an older one who has shown him kindness. But admiration and loyalty are not the same thing. And Henry Nash is not a man who will choose loyalty over what's right when you put the truth in front of him. He paused. Let me talk to him, not you. Me. He trusts me. Maggie looked at him for a long moment. The snow came down between them. If you're wrong about him, she said, Decker will know everything within the hour. I know. He said it the same way he said most things. Quiet, certain, carrying the full weight of what it meant. I'm not wrong. She studied his face, the particular stillness of it, the way he held himself like a man who had learned that the world would test him regularly and had decided some time ago to simply be ready. Thomas had had a version of that quality. Thomas had been warm where this man was quiet, quick where this man was deliberate. But underneath both of them was the same thing, the bone-deep refusal to look away from what was true. She had loved Thomas for it. She recognized it now in someone else, and it unsettled her in a way she didn't examine too closely. Talk to Nash, she said, but not in the open, not anywhere Decker can see. Nash came to Dot's kitchen at 4 in the afternoon, hat in hand, snow on his boots, looking younger than 28, in the way that young men look younger when they are about to hear something that will age them. Caleb had asked him simply to come, and Nash had come, because that was the kind of man he was. Caleb put the 2 letters on the table. Maggie put the military record beside them. Nash read everything without speaking. When he finished, he sat for a moment with his hands flat on the table and his eyes fixed on the photograph of Arthur Vane. Lord Almighty, he said. It came out barely above a whisper. Henry, Caleb's voice was steady. Look at that photograph and tell me what you see. Nash looked. He looked for a long time. Then he put the photograph down and looked at the wall instead. The way people look at walls when what they're processing is too large to look at directly. That's him, he said. That's Reverend Decker. He paused. 20-some years younger, but that's him. Yes, Maggie said. Nash looked at her. My wife goes to his services every Sunday. My wife... He stopped. He baptized our son. His voice had gone strange and flat, in the way voices go when emotion is running too fast for expression to keep up with it. He baptized my son last April, and held him over the font and said, he pressed his lips together hard. Then he looked at Caleb. What do you need from me? Caleb told him about the church, the side door, the locked cabinet, the journal they were looking for. Nash listened without interrupting, which was a thing Maggie noted. The young deputy had the rare and valuable quality of listening fully before he responded. When Caleb finished, Nash said, I go in with you. Henry, I go in with you. His voice had found its floor again, steady and final. He baptized my son in that church, Caleb. If there is something in that building that tells me what this man really is, I need to see it with my own eyes. I need to be able to stand up in front of this town and say I saw it myself. He looked at Maggie. And if something goes wrong tonight, you want a badge in that room with you, even a small-town deputy's badge. Maggie looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Nash. Then he nodded once. "Midnight," Caleb said. "Side door." Decker appeared at the boarding house at 6 o'clock, with a pot of beef stew his housekeeper Mrs. Fitch had made and an expression of genuine-seeming concern for the community's morale. He moved through Dot's kitchen with the ease of a man entirely at home, ladling stew and exchanging quiet words with each person there. He spoke to Dot about her sister in Cheyenne. He spoke to Ruth Whitfield about her lumbago. He ruffled Clara's hair and called her a bright penny, which made Clara beam in the way that 7-year-olds beam when adults pay them sincere attention. Maggie watched from across the room. Josie appeared beside her. The girl moved the same way her father did, without announcing herself, simply arriving. She stood next to Maggie with a bowl of stew she wasn't eating and watched Decker move around the room. "He does that," Josie said quietly, quiet enough that only Maggie could hear. "He makes everyone feel like the most important person in the room when he talks to them. Mama used to say that was a gift." She paused. "But Mama also said that when something seems too perfect, it's worth asking what it's covering." Maggie looked at the girl. "Your mother was a wise woman." "Yes," Josie said it simply, without the performed sadness that adults sometimes brought to the subject. Just acknowledgement. Just truth. "She was." She kept her eyes on Decker. "He's watching you. He's been watching you since he came in. He talks to everyone else, but his eyes keep coming back to you." A pause. "He's scared of you." "Good," Maggie said. Josie looked up at her. 12 years old with those careful, dark eyes. "Will you be safe tonight?" Maggie considered giving her the comfortable answer. Then she considered who she was talking to. "I intend to be," she said. "That's not the same as yes." "No," Maggie agreed. "It isn't." Josie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My father hasn't looked at anyone the way he looks at you since my mother died." She said it without accusation, without agenda, with the directness of a child who had not yet learned to dress observation in social clothing. "I thought I would mind that when it happened." She looked back at Decker. "I don't mind." Maggie did not know what to do with that, so she did what she generally did with things she didn't know what to do with. She held it quietly and moved forward. "Finish your stew," she said, "and stay close to your sister tonight." Josie nodded and moved away, and Maggie turned her attention back to Decker and found, as Josie had said, that his eyes had come back to her. He smiled when their eyes met. Warm, genuine seeming, unafraid. That was the part that troubled her most. He was not afraid. He was something else. Attentive, calculating, waiting. The smile of a man who believed he had already arranged the next move and was simply waiting for the other players to catch up to the board position he had prepared for them. She smiled back, even and pleasant, and giving away nothing. He turned away first. Midnight came, slow and absolute. The snow had stopped around 10, which was both good and bad. Good because moving through drifts in full dark was difficult enough without fresh accumulation. Bad because fresh snow would have covered their tracks. The cold had deepened, in the way it always deepened when a storm cleared, the sky opening up and the temperature dropping 10 degrees in an hour. The stars were out, brutally bright over the white roofs of Sweetwater. Caleb, Maggie, and Nash came to the alley behind the church separately and from different directions, which had been Maggie's instruction and which Nash had followed with the quiet professionalism of someone who had just recalibrated everything he knew about the situation he was in. The side door was exactly as Caleb remembered. The lock had never seated properly because the door frame had shifted in the cold 2 winters after construction, and no one had ever bothered to rehang it. He applied pressure in the right place, and the door swung open with the soft resignation of something that had been waiting to fail for years. Inside, the church was dark and cold, and smelled of candle wax and wood smoke, and something underneath those things. Something older and faintly metallic that Maggie identified without wanting to and filed away without commenting on. Nash kept the door. Caleb and Maggie moved toward the back room, guided by the thin beam of a shuttered lantern that Nash had brought, set to its lowest useful light. The study door was closed, but not locked, which meant either Decker was confident enough in the room's concealment to forego the lock, or he had removed anything worth protecting before he went to bed. Maggie pushed the door, and it swung open. The cabinet was against the far wall, exactly as Ruth had described. Military issue, dark wood, padlocked. Old. Caleb had a look at the padlock and produced from his coat pocket a thin piece of iron bent at the tip that he offered to Maggie without comment. She looked at him. He looked back. "Eleanor used to lock herself out of the house," he said simply. It was not the moment for that sentence to be as painful as it was, but grief had never consulted Caleb Hargrove on timing. Maggie took the iron, worked the lock. It was a good lock, but not a new one, and the mechanism had softened with age. It came open in under a minute. Inside the cabinet were three things: a leather journal, thick with years of entries, a bundle of papers, land documents, surveyor's maps, signatures that meant nothing yet and would mean everything with context. And at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, a United States Army officer's revolver with an engraved nameplate on the grip. Maggie read the nameplate. Captain T.R. Calloway, U.S. Army, retired. Her hands stopped moving. It was Thomas's service revolver, the one that had disappeared the day he was killed, the one she had reported missing and been told was probably taken by the mugger who had robbed him in that Denver alley on a Wednesday afternoon. The mugger who had never been found, because there had never been a mugger. Only a man with a 7-year history of making necessary problems disappear quietly and efficiently. She held it for a moment. Just a moment. The metal was cold, and the engraving was exactly as she remembered it, and the weight of it was the same weight she had held once in Thomas's hand when he showed her how to fire it on a summer afternoon before the war found him again in the shape of Arthur Vane. She put it in her coat. Then she took the journal and the papers, and she stepped back. That was when they heard the footsteps. Not from outside, from inside, from the direction of the front of the church, slow and deliberate, and absolutely, entirely unsurprised. Nash appeared in the study doorway, his hand on his gun, his face telling them everything before he said a word. Then he said it anyway, because some things needed to be spoken. "He's in the church. He was already here when we came in." A pause. The short, terrible pause of a man recalculating every assumption he has made in the last 6 hours. "He knew we were coming." The footsteps stopped. The church was silent. Then Silas Decker's voice came through the dock, warm, unhurried, almost kind, from somewhere near the altar. "I think," he said, "it is past time we had an honest conversation, Miss Calloway. Don't you?" Maggie did not move. That was the first thing, the discipline of not moving when every instinct said run. Because running in the dark toward a man who had been in this room longer than you had was how you died. She looked at Nash. Nash looked at Caleb. Caleb's hand was at his side, not on his gun yet, which told Maggie he was thinking the same thing she was. That a man who had orchestrated everything up to this moment did not walk into a dark church unarmed and alone, simply to have a conversation. "He has someone with him," she said quietly, not a question. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Yes." She raised her voice to carry through the dark. "All right, Reverend. Let's talk." She moved forward through the study doorway into the body of the church, and she kept Thomas's revolver in her coat pocket with her hand around it, and she did not think about Thomas. Because thinking about Thomas right now would cost her something she could not afford to spend. Decker was standing near the front pew. He had a lantern, turned up full, and he held it slightly to one side, in the way that people hold lanterns when they want to see clearly, without being obvious about the fact that they are trying to see clearly. He was wearing his coat and his gloves, and he looked, as he always looked, like a man who had somewhere important to be and had graciously agreed to stop first. Beside him, holding a rifle with the competent ease of someone who had held rifles before they were old enough to shave, was a young man Maggie had seen twice at the livery stable. Maybe 19. Dark-eyed and watchful, and clearly being paid enough that it had resolved whatever moral questions he might otherwise have had about the situation. Nash came in behind Maggie and Caleb. He put himself slightly to the left, which created 3 separate angles in the room, which was either instinct or training, and Maggie was grateful for it either way. Decker looked at the 3 of them with the expression of a man reviewing a situation he had already fully planned for. "Deputy Nash," he said, and his voice carried the particular warmth of a man who genuinely liked the person he was about to destroy. "I am sorry to see you here, truly." "Are you?" Nash's voice had gone flat in a way Maggie had not heard from him before. It was a good sound. The sound of a young man who has burned through his shock and come out the other side into something harder and more useful. "You're a good man, Henry. You've always been a good man." "This," Decker gestured at the room with his free hand, "was not something I wanted for you." "Then put down the rifle your man is holding and come with me to the office," Nash said, "and we'll sort it out proper." Decker smiled. It was the first smile Maggie had seen from him that was not warm. This one was something else. The expression of a man acknowledging, almost admiringly, the naivety of a particular position. "I'm afraid that's not going to happen." He turned his gaze to Maggie. "Miss Calloway, you have something of mine." "I have something that belongs to my husband," she said. "His name was engraved on it. That makes it his, not yours. Your husband is dead." "Yes, you made sure of that." Decker was quiet for a moment. In the stillness, Maggie could hear the cold working at the walls, the creak and settle of old timber. "Thomas Calloway was a thorough man," Decker said finally, and his voice had shifted into something that was almost respect. "I want you to know that he was very close, closer than anyone before him. I took no pleasure in what became necessary." "Then we have that in common," Maggie said. "I take no pleasure in what becomes necessary either." Something moved in Decker's face. Calculation, moving fast. He was reading her, and she was letting him. Because what he was reading was what she wanted him to read. A woman at the end of a 2-year road, tired and angry, and focused entirely on the man in front of her. It was true enough to be convincing. It was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that she had been counting the angles in this room since she walked in, and she had been watching the young man with the rifle since she identified him, and she had been measuring the distance between herself and the lantern Decker was holding for the past 45 seconds. "Give me the journal and the papers," Decker said, "and the revolver. Give me those things, and I will walk out of this town tonight, and you will never see me again. Your daughters will be safe, Hargrove. Dot Reeves's daughter will be safe. Ruth Whitfield's brother will be safe." He looked at Nash. "Your family will be safe." "You're not walking out of this town," Nash said. "Henry, you killed that girl." Nash's voice cracked once, just once, on the word girl, and then steadied. "She had a carpet bag on her back, and city boots, and she walked 3 miles in January because you sent her a letter with a good man's name on it. She was 24 years old. He paused. You don't get to walk out. Decker looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned to the young man with a rifle. Take the journal from Miss Calloway. The young man moved forward. He was watching Maggie, and he was watching Caleb, and he was not watching Nash, which was an error in prioritization that Nash corrected by drawing his pistol with considerably more speed than anyone in the room had credited him with, and saying in a voice that came out entirely steady, "Stop right there." The young man stopped. The room was very still. Caleb had his gun out now, too. He had not rushed it. He had simply produced it in the quiet way he did most things, and he held it with the ease of a man who had been using firearms for 20 years and had never once found them exciting. He looked at Decker. "Tell him to put it down." "If I do that," Decker said calmly, "I lose my primary leverage in this conversation." "You don't have leverage," Caleb said. "You have a 19-year-old boy with a rifle, 2 guns pointed at you, and a deputy who just watched you threaten his family." He paused. "Put it down." Decker looked at Caleb for a long time. Maggie watched him doing what he did, reading, calculating, running the numbers on the situation that had more variables than he had planned for. She could see the precise moment when he arrived at his conclusion, because his right shoulder dropped a 1/4 inch in the way shoulders drop when a person makes a decision their body registers before their face does. He looked at the young man. "Put it down, boy." The young man lowered the rifle slowly with the expression of someone who has just realized they have badly misjudged the risk profile of a job. Nash crossed the room, took the rifle, and positioned the boy against the far wall with efficient authority. Decker stood in the lantern light, without his leverage, without his junior accomplice, without the controlled situation he had walked in expecting to maintain. He looked, for the first time since Maggie had laid eyes on him, like a man who was working out what to do, rather than executing what he had already planned. She had been waiting 2 years to see that look on his face. "Sit down," she said. He sat, on the front pew, slowly, with the remaining dignity of a man who intended to treat every circumstance as though he had chosen it. He set the lantern beside him, and folded his hands in his lap, and looked at her with the particular attention of someone who is out of moves and knows it, and is trying very hard not to show that he knows it. Maggie pulled the journal from her coat and held it up. 7 years, she said. "You've been in Sweetwater 7 years. Before that, Cheyenne. Before that, Denver. Before that, 3 other towns and 2 other territories, each time with a different name. Each time building a life and leaving it when the ground started to feel unstable." She let that sit for a moment. "You killed 11 people across 15 years, Colonel Vane." "I know of 11. The journal likely has more." "Decker." She could not make herself call him Decker anymore. Not now. Not with the revolver in her pocket and the journal in her hand. Looked at the journal and then back at her. "You've been very thorough," he said. "Your husband trained you well." "My husband trained himself," she said. "I learned everything else on my own, after I buried him. Grief is a powerful motivator. So is justice." She looked at him steadily. "You brought me here. You sent that letter to Denver with Thomas's phrase in it because you wanted me to come. Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in his face. Not warmth, not calculation, but something she hadn't seen there before. Something almost genuine. "Because I was tired," he said. 15 years is a very long time to maintain a fiction." He looked at his hands. "I wanted someone to find me who was good enough to deserve it. Your husband was. And when he got close enough that I couldn't allow him to continue," he stopped. "I kept the revolver because I knew you would come. And I knew you would be good enough. And I wanted Another stop, longer this time. "What?" Maggie said. "I wanted it to be over." He said it the way a man says the truest thing he has said in years, quietly, without dress or decoration. "I have been Arthur Vane for 60 years, and Silas Decker for 7, and a dozen other names in between, and I have not slept without dreaming in 15 years, Miss Calloway. I brought you here because I wanted someone to come who would end it properly, legally, on the record, so that there would be a record." He looked at her. "So that the 11 people in that journal would have a record." The church was very quiet. Caleb stood where he had been standing, gun lowered now, watching Decker with an expression that was not sympathy and was not satisfaction, and was something more complicated and more human than either. Nash stood near the wall with his hand on the confiscated rifle, and his face showing very clearly the experience of a young man revising everything he thought he understood about the world. Maggie looked at Arthur Vane, and she thought about Thomas, about the Denver alley and the rain on the Friday, and the particular way his coat smelled that she had spent 2 years trying to forget and could not. She thought about Eliza Cord at the fence post, with her arm reaching for something solid. She thought about Dot's hands shaking in her lap, and Ruth Whitfield sitting alone beside a covered body. She thought about Josie Hargrove, 12 years old, saying, "He's scared of you," in a room full of people who were not scared of him at all. She put the journal back in her coat. "Henry," she said. Nash straightened. "Ma'am?" "He's your prisoner." She looked at Vane. "You'll be held here until the storm breaks and the road to Casper opens. Then you'll be transported to the territorial court. You'll give them every name in that journal and everything you know about the land fraud operations and the people who benefited from them." She paused. "If you do that, all of it, not some of it, I will tell the court that you cooperated fully. That's all I'll do for you. That's the only thing I'll do for you." Vane looked at her. "And if I don't?" "Then I'll spend the next 2 years making sure every crime you've committed is documented and prosecuted to the furthest extent of every applicable law in every territory you operated in." She held his eyes. "I've spent 2 years already. 2 more is nothing to me." He looked at her for a long moment. In the lantern light, his face was old and tired, and she thought, not for the first time, about what it cost a person to be what he had been. Not the moral cost. She had no interest in that accounting, but the simple human cost of maintaining a lie across decades, of never once allowing anyone to see you truly, of becoming so skilled at fiction that the truth had nowhere left to live. She did not feel sorry for him. She wanted to be clear with herself about that. She did not feel sorry for him. But she understood him, in the cold, limited way that one person can understand another who has made entirely different choices for entirely recognizable reasons. And understanding was not the same as forgiveness, and never would be. "All right," Vane said. "All right." Nash secured his wrists with the efficiency of a man who had found his footing in an unfamiliar situation and intended to keep it. He walked Vane and the young man toward the church's side room, where they would hold them until morning, and Maggie watched them go with her hand still around Thomas's revolver in her pocket. Caleb came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything. He was good at that, at being present without requiring a response to his presence. She had noticed that about him from the second day, and had continued noticing it, and had not yet decided what to do with the noticing. "He wanted to be caught," she said. Not to Caleb specifically. To the room, to herself, to the particular quality of silence that comes after something large has resolved, and the air hasn't caught up yet. "Yes," Caleb said. "That should make it feel like less. Like I didn't actually—" She stopped, started again. Thomas died chasing a man who was ready to be caught. That shouldn't... She pressed her lips together. Thomas died doing exactly what he believed was right, Caleb said. A man being ready doesn't change that. She looked at him. His face in the lantern light was the same as it had been every time she'd looked at it. Even, plain, entirely without performance. He was not offering comfort as a transaction. He was just telling her what was true because he was a man who told what was true regardless of whether it was convenient. "Keep the revolver," he said. "It's yours." She had not realized she had taken her hand off it. She put it back. "Yes," she said. Nash came back through the door. "They're secure. I've got the young man in the back room and Vane in the study with the cabinet." Seemed right somehow. He paused. "Caleb, I'm going to need you as a witness when I write my report. Everything from today. From the beginning." "I'll be there," Caleb said. Nash nodded. He looked at Maggie. "Ma'am, what you did tonight, what you've been doing for 2 years." He stopped, started again. "My son's name is James. My wife named him that. But his middle name is Thomas, because Thomas was my grandfather's name, and I've always thought it was a good name." He looked at her carefully. "I'll make sure he knows why it's a good name." Maggie looked at the young deputy for a moment. "Thank you, Henry," she said. It came out smaller than she intended and more sincere than she expected, and she let it be both those things. Nash went to write his report, and they were alone in the church, her and Caleb, and outside the temperature had dropped another 5 degrees, and the stars were still brutally bright over the white roofs of Sweetwater, and the road to Casper was still closed, and would be for at least another 10 days. And 52 people were still locked inside this town's borders with each other and whatever came next. "My girls," Caleb said. "Yes." She started moving. "Let's go." They walked out of the church into the cold that hit like a physical thing, and Caleb reached back and pulled the side door closed behind them, and she heard the lock catch for the first time in 7 years. They moved through the dark toward Dot's house, with the snow crunching under their boots, not touching, not speaking, but with the particular closeness of 2 people who have been through something together that has no name yet, and will not have one for some time. At the corner before Dot's house, Caleb stopped. She stopped because he did. He looked at her in the dark, and the starlight was enough to see by if you were paying attention. "When the road opens," he said. "When this is done, and Vane is on his way to Casper, and the town has what it needs. Are you—" He stopped. He was not a man who struggled with words in the way some men did, but this one gave him difficulty, and she watched him work through it without hurrying him, because hurrying him seemed like exactly the wrong thing to do. "Are you going back to Denver?" She thought about Denver. The office with Thomas's desk still in it. The house that was the right size for 2 people, and had been the wrong size for one for 2 years. The road she had been on since the Friday in the rain. The one she had told herself had only one destination and no stops along the way. "I don't know," she said. It was the most honest answer she had. It was more honest than she'd planned to be. Caleb looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded once, the way he nodded when something was settled enough to move forward from, and turned toward Dot's door. Inside, through the window, Maggie could see lamplight and the small shape of Clara sitting up past her bedtime, and the taller shape of Josie beside her. 2 girls waiting for their father to come back safe, the way they had waited every night for 3 years. The way children wait for the one person left who is irreplaceable. Caleb opened the door and went in, and Clara launched herself at him with the full force of a 7-year-old who has been sitting still too long, and relief makes reckless. And he caught her in one arm and held her against his chest, with his eyes closed for just a moment. That one private moment that fathers take and think no one sees. Josie looked at Maggie over her father's shoulder. Maggie gave her a small nod. Josie released a breath that she had apparently been holding for some hours, and for just a moment, only a moment, She looked exactly her age. 12 years old and frightened, and very glad that the people she loved had come back through the door. Then she straightened and composed herself, and was Josie Hargrove again, steady and watchful, and ready for whatever came next. The next 10 days were the longest Sweetwater had ever known. The blizzard that had been building since Maggie's arrival came down in full force the morning after Vane's arrest, sealing the town completely under 3 feet of new snow. No stage in, no stage out, no telegraph. The lines had gone down sometime in the night and wouldn't be repaired until the weather broke. 52 people locked inside their borders, with Arthur Vane secured in the church back room, and Henry Nash sitting outside that door in 8-hour shifts, and a town that was slowly, painfully processing what it had learned about the man who had baptized their children and buried their dead. It did not go smoothly. Nothing like this ever did. The morning after the arrest, Maggie stood in Dot's kitchen and told the assembled residents of Sweetwater what Arthur Vane had done. Not everything, not the full count of the journal, not the names she had not yet had time to fully document, but enough. The land fraud, the false identities, the 11 confirmed deaths across 15 years, Eliza Cord at the fence post, Thomas Calloway in a Denver alley, the letters written in borrowed names, sent to borrowed lives. She told them plainly and without performance, because she had learned from 2 years of investigation that plain truth, delivered without drama, was the only kind that people could hold on to when the dramatic version would collapse under the weight of its own emotion. The room was quiet when she finished. Then Pete Garrison from the livery said, "He set my boy's broken arm last March," and his voice had in it the particular bewilderment of a man who has just been told that something he was grateful for was done by someone who did not exist. "He said it correctly," Maggie said. "Whatever else he is, the medical knowledge was real." "Does that matter?" Pete asked. She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "Not for the purposes of what happens next, but it might matter to you, personally, when you're trying to figure out what to believe." She looked at the room. Some of what he did here was genuine. The care he showed people, the help he offered. That doesn't excuse any of it. But it's not something you have to decide was all false either. People are capable of being 2 things at once. It's one of the most difficult things about them. The room digested this in the way difficult truths get digested. Slowly, with resistance, with the grinding effort of recalibration. Several people cried. Beulah Marsh, who had brought Decker soup every Sunday for 4 years, because he had told her once it was the best soup he'd ever had, sat in the corner, with her hands in her lap, and did not say a single word for the entire duration of the conversation. Maggie left her to it. Grief had its own timing. Ruth Whitfield stood up before the meeting ended. She was 50 years old and had been carrying 6 weeks of silence like a stone in her chest, and she set it down in front of everyone, methodically, the way she did everything. She told them about the letter, about the threat to her brother's family, about sitting beside Eliza Cord's body and saying nothing, and what that had cost her. Her voice did not shake. Her voice was the clearest thing in the room. When she finished, Dot Reeves said, "Same. He did the same to me." And then 3 other women said variations of the same thing, and by the end of it, the room understood that he had not maintained silence through strength. He had maintained it through the precise targeting of specific vulnerabilities in specific people, which was a different thing entirely, and which mattered, because it meant no one in that room had failed. They had all simply been managed by someone who had been managing people for 15 years. Caleb said nothing during the meeting. He stood near the back wall where he always stood, watching. And when it was over, he stayed while people filed out and helped Dot stack chairs without being asked. Maggie watched him do it. He did not require acknowledgement for it. He just did it because it needed doing. And she thought that this, more than anything else she had observed about him in the past 10 days, was the thing she would carry away with her. She had not yet told him she was leaving. She was not yet entirely sure she was. On the 4th day of the blizzard, Josie knocked on the door of the room Maggie was using at Dot's boarding house and came in without waiting for an answer, which was such a precise mixture of her father's confidence and her own 12-year-old disregard for convention that Maggie almost smiled. Josie sat on the chair near the window and looked at the papers spread across the bed. Maggie's documentation of everything in Vane's journal, cross-referenced with the land records and the military file. She looked at them with the focused assessment of someone who actually wanted to understand what she was seeing. "What are those?" she asked. "Evidence," Maggie said, "for the court in Casper." "Are there enough of them?" "Yes." Josie nodded. Then she said, "Clara cried last night. She does that sometimes when she thinks about Mama. She doesn't tell Papa because she doesn't want him to be sad." She paused. "I tell her that Mama would say crying is just the heart doing its housekeeping. Mama used to say things like that." Maggie set down her pen. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was practical," Josie said. "In a warm way, if that makes sense. She didn't say soft things. She said useful things in a soft voice." She looked at Maggie with her father's direct gaze. "You say useful things too. You just say them in a direct voice instead." "Is that a criticism?" "No," Josie considered. "Clara thinks you're wonderful. She told Mrs. Ames that you were the most interesting person who'd ever come to Sweetwater, which I think is true, but probably isn't entirely the compliment it sounds like, given what's happened." Maggie looked at this girl, 12 years old, managing her sister's grief and her father's silence, and the general chaos of the past 10 days, with a steadiness that most adults would have struggled to maintain, and felt something that was not quite admiration and not quite protectiveness, but partook of both. "Josie," she said carefully, "when the road opens and Vane goes to Casper, things will go back to something close to normal here. People will take time, but they'll find their footing again." She paused. "Your father is a good man in a town that now knows it can trust him completely. You and Clara will be all right." Josie was quiet for a moment. She looked at the papers on the bed. Then she said, "Are you leaving?" Maggie did not answer immediately, and Josie, who had her father's patience as well as his eyes, waited without filling the silence. "I don't know yet," Maggie said. "Papa doesn't ask questions about things he's afraid of the answer to," Josie said. "He won't ask you that." She stood. "I'm not afraid of it, so I did." She moved to the door. "Clara wants to know if you'll have breakfast with us tomorrow. She's been asking Dot to make the good biscuits." "Tell her yes," Maggie said. Josie nodded and left, and Maggie sat for a long moment with the papers in front of her, and the wind working at the window, and something working at the inside of her chest that she hadn't had a name for in 2 years, and was beginning, cautiously, to recognize. On the 8th day, she went to see Vane. Nash let her in without comment. He had learned, in the past 8 days, which battles were worth fighting with Maggie Calloway, and this was not one of them. He unlocked the study door and stood outside it. Vane was sitting at what had been his desk, his hands unrestrained because he had made no attempt to leave, and both Nash and Maggie understood that he had no intention of doing so. He looked up when she came in and said nothing. She sat across from him, put the journal on the desk between them. "I've documented everything in here," she said. "Every name, every date, every location. The territorial prosecutor in Casper has been informed by letter through Nash's department. We got a writer out 2 days ago, during the brief break in the storm." She paused. "I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Not the honest answer of a man who has been honest for 15 minutes. The actual truth." "Ask," he said. "Eliza Cord, She held his eyes. She served no strategic purpose. She didn't know anything. She wasn't connected to Thomas's investigation. She was 24 years old, with city boots and a carpetbag and a letter she believed in. She let that land. Why her? Vane was quiet for a longer moment than she expected. When he spoke, his voice had none of the warmth she had heard from him in the street, in Dot's kitchen, in the church on the night of his arrest. What was left underneath the warmth was not cold exactly. It was simply empty. The voice of a man who has spent his reserves. "I needed a reason for you to come that wouldn't alert you immediately," he said. A detective's instinct is to be suspicious of an obvious trap. But a dead girl at the property of a man whose name was used without his knowledge. That was a story that would pull you in without your defenses up. He looked at the desk. I told myself she would make it to the boarding house, that the distance was manageable, that she was young and strong. He paused. I was wrong. You killed her. Yes. He said it without the evasion she had been half expecting. I killed her. Not with a blade, not with a gun. But I put her in the path of something I knew might kill her, and told myself the probability was acceptable. And she died from it. That is killing a person, Miss Calloway. I am not confused about what it is. She looked at him for a long time. Is there anything you want said at your trial? Any account you want on the record beyond what's in the journal? Yes. He reached into the desk drawer. Nash had left him paper and a pen, which Maggie had thought was either naive or deliberate, and had decided was deliberate, and pulled out a folded document. I've been writing since the night of my arrest. 11 names, fully accounted for. Dates, methods, and in each case, the chain of decision-making that led to the act. Not as justification. He was careful about this. As record, so that those 11 people have a complete accounting, so that their families, if they have families, can know exactly what happened. Maggie took the document. It was heavier than she expected. Not in weight, but in the way that certain objects are heavy. The way her grandmother's Bible had been heavy. The way Thomas's badge had been heavy in her hand on the Friday she cleaned out his desk. I'll see that it reaches the prosecutor, she said. She stood to leave. At the door, she stopped with her hand on the frame. She did not turn around. I hope you sleep better, she said. Before the end. I hope the dreaming stops. She wasn't sure why she said it. She had not planned to say anything of the kind. But it was true, in the spare, unsentimental way that she tried to be true about things. And so she said it, and walked out, and did not look back. Nash locked the door behind her. He looked at her face and made the wise choice not to comment on what he saw there. The road to Casper opened on the 11th day. The territorial marshal arrived the morning of the 12th with 2 deputies and a transport wagon, and the quiet, efficient manner of a man who had done this before and understood that the town he was arriving in had been through something that required a certain quality of care alongside the official process. He spoke to Nash first, then to Maggie, then to Caleb, then to the assembled residents who had gathered in the street despite the cold because they needed to see it. Needed to see Vane walk out of the church and into the wagon with their own eyes, in daylight, in front of everyone. Vane walked out with his hands shackled and his back straight, and he did not look at the crowd that lined the street. He looked straight ahead, at the wagon, at whatever was at the end of the road he was now on. Maggie stood near the front of the crowd, and she watched every step, and she felt what she had expected to feel for 2 years. The completion of something. The closing of a wound that had been open so long she had half forgotten what uninjured felt like. Clara pushed through the crowd to stand beside her and took her hand without preamble. She was 7 years old, and she did it the way 7-year-olds do things. Entirely. without reservation, with her small fingers wrapped completely around Maggie's and her face turned up toward the wagon. "Is it over now?" Clara asked. Maggie looked down at her. "Yes, Bug, it's over." Clara nodded once, satisfied, and did not let go of her hand. On the other side of her, Caleb appeared the way he always appeared, without announcement, simply present. He did not take her other hand. He stood close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him in the January cold, and he watched the marshal's wagon move down the street with the same level, clear expression he had brought to everything over the past 12 days. When the wagon rounded the corner and disappeared from view, the crowd began to disperse, slowly, in the way crowds disperse after something that was both necessary and terrible. With the particular exhaustion of people who have been carrying tension for a long time and are only now setting it down and feeling how heavy it was. Dot Reeves went back inside. Ruth Whitfield went back to her shop. Nash stood in the street for a long moment, watching the place where the wagon had been, and then squared his shoulders and went to write the last of his reports. Pete Garrison led his horses back into the warmth of the livery. The street emptied. The cold settled back in. Sweetwater looked the way it always looked in January, white and still and sealed against the sky, enduring. Clara finally let go of Maggie's hand to chase after Josie, who was heading toward Dot's for what she had been informed would be celebratory biscuits. Maggie watched them go, the small one running, the older one walking fast to keep up and pretending she wasn't. Then she looked at Caleb. He was already looking at her. "I owe George Tully $3, he said. "He told me 2 weeks ago that the marshal would arrive on the 12th, and I said I bet $3 it was the 11th. He paused. "He's been very patient about it." Maggie looked at him. 2 weeks ago, she had stepped off a stage into a January street and found a man standing in a doorway with a letter he hadn't written and an expression that gave away nothing. 12 days of a blizzard and a murder and a trial and 10 nights in a house she didn't own, eating biscuits at someone else's table with 2 girls who had borrowed her without asking, and she had let them borrow her without admitting she'd noticed. "Caleb," she said. "Yes? I'm going to Casper to testify at the trial. I'll need to be there for at least 2 weeks. Possibly 3. She held his eyes. "After that, I need to go to Denver, close the office properly, settle some things." "All right," he said. He said it the way he said things. Not small, not large, just present, holding the full weight of what was in it, without making her carry that weight for him. "After Denver," she said. "I don't have anywhere particular that I need to be." Caleb was quiet for a moment. The cold moved between them, and neither of them moved out of it. "Sweetwater has a need for a doctor," he said. "Doc Briscoe's been talking about retiring for 2 years. The nearest replacement is 40 miles in good weather." He paused. "And I have a spare cabin. It's not much, but it sits on good ground, and the view in spring is—" He stopped. Adjusted. "The view in spring is worth the winter it takes to get there." Maggie looked at him for a long moment, looked at the face that had just there. The way he had been there for 12 days through weather and death and revelation, and the long cold nights where no one slept well, and the longer cold days where everything had to be done anyway. When she reached Dot's door, she stopped and looked back at him. He stopped too. "Thank you," she said, "for believing me on the first day, before you had a reason to." He thought about this the way he thought about things, actually with full attention. "You told me the truth plain," he said. "Seemed right to meet it the same way." She nodded, pushed the door open. Inside, Clara announced at full volume that Miss Calloway was back, and could they please have the biscuits now? And Josie told her to let people get their coats off first. And Dot said the biscuits would be ready in 10 minutes regardless, and everyone should sit down. and the kitchen was warm and full of the smell of coffee and bread and the ordinary, irreplaceable business of people gathered around a table on a cold morning because they chose to be there. Maggie hung her coat on the hook inside the door. She sat down at the table. Clara immediately installed herself in the adjacent chair and began telling her something about the horse she had ridden to town 2 weeks ago, and how it was smarter than her sister's horse, and considerably smarter than most people she knew. Across the table, Josie met Maggie's eyes and raised one eyebrow in the expression of a 12-year-old who has been managing her sister's monologue since birth, and has made a kind of peace with it. Maggie smiled, actually smiled, with her whole face, in the unguarded way she had not smiled at anyone in 2 years, because there was no one left to guard against, and no reason left to hold it back, and the biscuits were coming, and the coffee was hot, and the man who had killed her husband was in a marshal's wagon on the road to justice, and outside the window, the Wyoming sky was the hard, brilliant blue that came after a storm, when the world was clean again. Caleb poured himself coffee and sat across from Clara and listened to the horse story with the patient attention of a man who had heard the story approximately 400 times, and had decided some years ago that the story was not really about the horse. He looked up once, briefly, and found Maggie already looking, and neither of them looked away for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then Clara said, "Papa, you're not listening." And he said, "I am listening." And she said, "What did I just say?" And he repeated the last 3 words exactly. And she looked deeply suspicious, but could not prove anything, which was, Maggie thought, a remarkably accurate summary of the last 12 days. The biscuits came. The coffee was refilled. The morning moved forward the way mornings do, one small, ordinary, irreplaceable moment at a time. 2,000 miles of road and 2 years of grief had brought Margaret Calloway to a kitchen table in Sweetwater, Wyoming, in January of 1882, with a dead man's revolver in her coat pocket, and a warrant for testimony on a court docket in Casper, and a child's hand reaching for the biscuit plate, and a man across the table who had told her the truth, plain, and expected the same in return. She had come looking for the end of a long road. She had found, instead, the beginning of one she hadn't known she was on. And for the first time in 2 years, for the first time since a Friday in the rain in Denver, when the world had been divided into before and after, Margaret Calloway looked at what was in front of her and did not look past it toward something else. She was here. She was alive. She had done what she came to do. And what came next, she would build with her own hands, on good ground, in the place where the view in spring was worth the winter it took to get there.